Imagine standing on an endless ice age plain as the frozen wind cuts across the grass. In the distance, a massive herbivore tears at the tough vegetation, its enormous body making it seem almost untouchable. At hundreds, perhaps even thousands of pounds, it has little reason to fear. Few predators would dare challenge an animal that size. Then, almost imperceptibly, the silence changes. Hidden among the scattered shrubs and broken terrain, a pair of amber eyes never leaves its target. The giant hasn't noticed yet, but the hunt has already begun. When most people picture the ultimate predator, they imagine the biggest animal in the landscape. It seems like common sense. Greater size means greater strength, and greater strength should mean dominance. Yet nature rarely follows simple rules. Across ecosystems, the largest carnivores are usually much smaller than the prey they hunt. Lions bring down buffalo, weighing several times more than themselves. Wolves overwhelm towering moose. Even today's tigers regularly kill animals far heavier than they are. No predator, however, pushed this strategy further than a cat that ruled the Americas during the Ice Age. Smilodon wasn't the largest animal in its world. It wasn't even close. It lived alongside mammoths, giant bison, and enormous ground sloths that dwarfed it in both height and weight. By every measure, these herbivores should have held the advantage. Yet for hundreds of thousands of years, this saber-toothed hunter stood at the very top of the food chain. How could a predator weighing less than many of its victims become the undisputed giant killer of an entire continent? The answer begins with a problem every carnivore faces. Plants capture energy directly from the sun. Herbivores feed on those plants, and predators survive only on the small fraction of energy passed up the food chain. That simple ecological rule limits how large most predators can become. Instead of evolving into bigger hunters, evolution often favors something far more effective: specialization. And few animals ever specialized as completely or as successfully as Smilodon. To understand why Smilodon became one of the most successful predators of the Ice Age, we first have to unravel a mystery that confused scientists for decades. Ironically, when its fossils were first uncovered more than 160 years ago in Brazil, no one realized they belonged to a giant saber-toothed cat. The earliest discovery consisted mainly of isolated cheek teeth, and those teeth bore a striking resemblance to those of modern hyenas. Based on the limited evidence available, paleontologists concluded they had discovered an unusually large prehistoric hyena, and gave it the name Hyaena neogea. That interpretation didn't survive for long. As more fossils emerged from the ground, the picture changed dramatically. Massive foot bones, fragments of an unusually robust skeleton, and, most importantly, a pair of enormous curved canine teeth revealed that this animal was unlike anything alive today. It wasn't a hyena at all. It belonged to an entirely different branch of the carnivore family tree. The giant predator was eventually renamed Smilodon populator, with Smilodon meaning knife tooth, a fitting tribute to the oversized weapons that dominated its skull. Those discoveries raised an even bigger question. If Smilodon wasn't a hyena, what exactly was it? Although it is often called a saber-toothed tiger, that nickname is misleading. Smilodon wasn't a tiger, nor was it closely related to lions, leopards, or any of the big cats roaming the planet today. Instead, it belonged to an extinct group of felids known as the Machaerodonts, a lineage that split away from the ancestors of modern cats millions of years earlier before evolving its own extraordinary adaptations. Over time, researchers discovered that Smilodon itself wasn't represented by just a single species. The oldest was Smilodon gracilis, which appeared in North America around 2.5 million years ago, and was roughly comparable in size to a modern jaguar. About a million years later came Smilodon fatalis, a heavier and far more muscular predator often matching the largest living tigers in weight. Finally, around 600,000 years after that, the giant Smilodon populator emerged in South America. It was the largest of them all, with exceptional individuals approaching the weight of a medium-sized polar bear. With each new species, evolution refined the same basic blueprint, producing progressively larger and more formidable hunters perfectly suited for an age of giants. As Smilodon evolved from one species into the next, it didn't simply become larger. It became increasingly specialized. Every generation seemed to push the limits of what a cat could be, transforming an already formidable predator into an animal engineered almost exclusively for confronting prey that outweighed it several times over. Looking at its skeleton today, it's difficult to find a single feature that wasn't shaped by the demands of hunting giants. Its sheer size was the first clue. Even the smallest species, Smilodon gracilis, rivaled a modern jaguar, one of today's most powerful cats pound for pound. Smilodon fatalis was another step up, matching the largest African lions in length but carrying substantially more muscle across its shoulders and forequarters, often weighing around 620 pounds. Then there was Smilodon populator, the true heavyweight of the family. Exceptional individuals may have tipped the scales at more than 1,000 pounds, placing them in the same weight class as a medium-sized polar bear. Yet, unlike many modern predators, this immense build wasn't restricted to oversized males. Evidence suggests males and females were remarkably similar in size, meaning an Ice Age landscape would have been populated by powerful hunters regardless of sex. But raw weight alone doesn't explain how Smilodon subdued animals many times larger than itself. The real story lies in its proportions. Compared with lions, tigers, and jaguars, Smilodon possessed unusually short yet incredibly thick limbs. Its bones were dense and heavily reinforced, providing sturdy anchor points for massive muscles. Nowhere was this more apparent than in the forelimbs, which were roughly 20% thicker than scientists would expect in a cat of comparable size. Those muscular arms functioned less like the legs of a sprinter and more like the grappling limbs of a wrestler, built to seize struggling prey and keep it pinned to the ground. Its claws were equally extraordinary. Like those of modern cats, they were fully retractable, preserving razor-sharp edges until the moment they were needed. But they were far larger than expected. Reconstructions suggest Smilodon's claws were roughly twice the size of those of a Siberian tiger, and even exceeded the length of the claws of a Kodiak brown bear, an animal that can weigh nearly twice as much. Although capable of inflicting devastating wounds, their greatest advantage was probably grip. Every swipe increased the predator's ability to cling to an enormous panicking herbivore long enough for the final attack. Its hind limbs completed the picture. A particularly robust heel bone indicates that Smilodon was a powerful jumper, likely capable of launching itself onto the backs or shoulders of unsuspecting prey from close range. Rather than chasing victims across open plains like modern cheetahs, it appears to have relied on explosive bursts of power, overwhelming prey before it had a chance to escape. Viewed as a whole, Smilodon's anatomy tells a remarkably consistent story. Lions are built to combine strength with endurance, tigers balance stealth with versatility, and jaguars specialize in crushing bites against heavily armored prey. Smilodon followed a different path entirely. Its skeleton wasn't designed for speed, long pursuits, or general-purpose hunting. Every oversized muscle attachment, every reinforced bone, and every exaggerated claw points toward a single evolutionary goal: overpowering the largest animals of the Ice Age. And once those giants were firmly under its control, its most famous weapons could finally come into play. Those oversized claws and reinforced limbs were only half the equation. Holding a giant herbivore still was one challenge. Delivering the fatal blow was another entirely. For that task, Smilodon possessed one of the most extraordinary weapons evolution has ever produced. Long before Smilodon appeared, nature had already begun experimenting with saber-shaped teeth. Similar canines evolved independently in several groups of mammals, and even some distant reptilian relatives developed comparable adaptations millions of years earlier. Each was an example of convergent evolution, where unrelated animals arrive at remarkably similar solutions to the same survival problem. But while saber teeth evolved more than once, no known felid pushed the concept as far as Smilodon did. Its upper canines could reach nearly 8 inches or about 20 centimeters in length. Even when its mouth was closed, the tips protruded below the lower jaw, giving the animal an unmistakable silhouette. Yet their impressive size came with an equally important drawback. These teeth were surprisingly slender. Unlike the thick, conical canines of a lion or tiger, Smilodon's sabers were narrow and relatively fragile. They were designed to pierce flesh with precision, not to withstand the twisting forces created by wrestling prey or crushing bone. That design helps explain one of the biggest surprises revealed by biomechanical studies. Despite its enormous head and muscular neck, Smilodon did not possess an exceptionally powerful bite. Estimates suggest it generated only around 1,000 newtons of force, roughly 4 times weaker than the bite of a modern lion. At first glance, that seems completely backwards. How could an animal equipped with the largest saber teeth of any cat evolve such a comparatively weak bite? The answer lies in how those teeth were intended to be used. A weapon doesn't always become more effective by applying greater force. A sewing needle passes effortlessly through fabric not because it is powerful, but because all of its force is concentrated onto an incredibly small point. Smilodon's canines followed the same principle. Their long, narrow profile focused pressure at the tips, allowing them to penetrate soft tissue with remarkable efficiency. Instead of relying on brute force, evolution favored precision. Its skull reveals another crucial adaptation. Smilodon's jaws could open to an astonishing angle of nearly 120 degrees, almost twice as wide as a human mouth and far beyond what modern big cats can achieve. Such an enormous gape allowed those elongated canines to clear the lower jaw before driving deep into a victim. Without that flexibility, the famous saber teeth would have been more of a burden than an advantage. Exactly how Smilodon delivered the killing bite, however, remains one of paleontology's most fascinating debates. One long-standing hypothesis suggests it used its powerful forelimbs to wrestle prey onto the ground before plunging its sabers into the abdomen, inflicting catastrophic internal injuries and massive blood loss. More recent research has increasingly favored another possibility. After pinning its victim, Smilodon may have targeted the throat instead, driving its canines into the neck with a rapid, controlled strike that severed major blood vessels or damaged the airway, leading to fatal blood loss and suffocation. While the details are still debated, both ideas point toward the same conclusion. Smilodon wasn't built to overpower prey with crushing jaws like a lion or jaguar. It was engineered to restrain first, then deliver one devastating, surgically precise attack that few Ice Age giants could survive. Once Smilodon had evolved the body of a heavyweight wrestler and the teeth of a precision weapon, there remained one final challenge. Even the most perfectly designed predator cannot survive unless it consistently finds prey large enough to justify its enormous investment in muscle and specialized anatomy. Fortunately for Smilodon, it lived during one of the richest periods of large animal diversity the world has ever known. Across North America, the landscape was filled with giants. Vast herds of extinct bison grazed the open plains alongside camels unlike any alive today. Giant ground sloths browsed on trees, while armored glyptotheres wandered with protective shells that rivaled those of small cars. Towering mastodons and Columbian mammoths moved through forests and grasslands, reshaping entire ecosystems as they fed. South America offered an equally impressive menu. There, Smilodon shared its habitat with massive herbivores such as Toxodon, the long-necked Macrauchenia, giant glyptodonts, prehistoric horses, camelids, and enormous caimans that ruled the waterways. It was a world overflowing with megafauna, and Smilodon occupied the very top of that food web. Exactly which animals formed the core of its diet is still debated. Fossil evidence clearly confirms that many of these species were hunted, but identifying a predator's preferred prey is far more difficult than simply finding bite marks on bones. The answer likely varied between regions and even between the different species of Smilodon. Whether these cats hunted alone or cooperatively would also have influenced the size of the animals they targeted. Regardless of those details, nearly every line of evidence points towards the same conclusion. Smilodon focused on prey far larger than itself. Its hunting strategy reflected that specialization. Unlike wolves, which rely on endurance to exhaust their victims, or cheetahs, which depend on breathtaking speed across open ground, Smilodon appears to have been an ambush predator. Dense woodland, patches of shrubs, broken terrain, and the edges of forests would have provided ideal cover. From there, it likely waited with extraordinary patience until an unsuspecting herbivore wandered within striking distance. The attack itself probably unfolded in seconds. With powerful hind limbs providing explosive acceleration, Smilodon launched itself forward rather than engaging in a prolonged chase. Its robust forelimbs wrapped around the prey's shoulders or neck, while its oversized claws dug deep to maintain an unbreakable grip. Every part of its body worked to destabilize the animal before it could build momentum. A panicked giant weighing several times more than the predator was dangerous enough on its own. Allowing that prey to remain standing for too long could easily turn the hunt into a fatal mistake. Its nervous system seems to have been equally well suited for this style of hunting. Studies of the brain cavities suggest Smilodon possessed excellent coordination, keen hearing, and highly developed sensory processing. The shape of its eye sockets indicates forward-facing binocular vision, providing exceptional depth perception, an essential advantage for accurately judging the precise moment to leap. Timing, after all, was everything. Missing by even a fraction of a second could mean crashing into a fleeing herbivore or being thrown beneath its feet. Fossil evidence even hints at the violence of these encounters. Many Smilodon skeletons preserve injuries around the sternum that researchers interpret as the result of forceful collisions with prey. Rather than suggesting weakness, these healed injuries paint a picture of a predator that repeatedly hurled its own body into animals many times its size, surviving impacts that would have crippled less specialized hunters. The abundance of megafauna during the Ice Age made such specialization possible, with mammoths, giant bison, enormous sloths, and countless other massive herbivores dominating the landscape. There was little evolutionary pressure for Smilodon to become a generalist. Large prey was plentiful, and its extraordinary anatomy allowed it to exploit a niche few other predators could match. For hundreds of thousands of years, that strategy proved spectacularly successful. But ruling an ecosystem rarely means ruling it alone. And even the greatest giant killer had rivals eager to compete for the same prize. Its greatest competitors were the American lion and the dire wolf. Isotopic studies of fossil bones indicate that all three predators relied heavily on many of the same large herbivores, placing them in direct competition for food. The American lion likely held an advantage in overall size and speed, while packs of dire wolves could overwhelm prey through sheer numbers. Smilodon, however, brought something neither rival possessed: unmatched grappling strength and a terrifying set of saber teeth that were impossible to ignore. Even if confrontations were relatively rare, the mere threat posed by those oversized canines may have been enough to convince many competitors that a meal wasn't worth the risk. One of the most intriguing windows into Smilodon's behavior comes from the famous La Brea tar pits in California. These natural asphalt traps preserved an astonishing number of Ice Age fossils after struggling herbivores became trapped, attracting waves of hungry predators that often met the same fate. More than 160,000 Smilodon fossils have been recovered from the site, making it one of the most abundant large predators found there. Some researchers argue that this abundance reflects social behavior. In modern cats, species that live and hunt in groups tend to respond more readily to the distress calls of struggling animals. If Smilodon behaved similarly, entire groups may have approached trapped prey together, explaining why so many individuals became preserved in the tar. Additional evidence comes from the animals themselves. Several skeletons show severe injuries that had completely healed before death. One famous individual suffered from hip dysplasia from a young age, a condition that would have made hunting alone extremely difficult. Yet it survived well into adulthood. Some paleontologists interpret this as evidence that injured Smilodon received food or protection from others, suggesting a level of social care rarely seen outside highly cooperative predators. Not everyone agrees. Fossils discovered away from predator traps are often found as isolated individuals, leading other researchers to argue that Smilodon may have lived and hunted alone, coming together only occasionally when food was abundant. The debate remains unresolved, and both interpretations have supporting evidence. Whether solitary ambushers or members of loosely organized groups, one fact is beyond dispute. Smilodon stood among the most formidable predators the Ice Age ever produced, yet even a hunter so perfectly adapted to its world could not escape the consequences when that world itself began to disappear. For most of Smilodon's reign, it stood at the top of an ecosystem shaped almost entirely by nature. Then, toward the end of the Ice Age, a new predator entered the Americas: one unlike anything it had encountered before. Modern humans arrived roughly 25,000 years ago, bringing with them intelligence, sophisticated hunting tools, and an ability to adapt to almost any environment. For the first time, Smilodon was sharing its world with a species capable of competing not through strength, but through strategy. Exactly what those encounters looked like remains largely unknown. There is no direct archaeological evidence showing humans and Smilodon fighting one another, but it would be remarkable if their paths never crossed. Both hunted many of the same large herbivores, meaning they were often drawn to the same hunting grounds and carcasses. A freshly killed mammoth or giant bison would have been just as valuable to a group of humans as it was to a hungry saber-toothed cat, creating the potential for dangerous confrontations. One of the most intriguing clues comes from a petroglyph discovered in South America and described by researchers in 2021. The carving appears to depict a group of humans observing what many interpret as a smilodon. While it doesn't prove conflict, it strongly suggests that people and these formidable predators shared the landscape and were familiar with one another's presence. Whether humans actively hunted Smilodon or simply competed for the same food remains an open question. What is far less controversial is that our arrival began reshaping the ecosystem itself. As human populations expanded, hunting pressure on large herbivores increased, while the use of fire and changing landscapes altered habitats that had supported megafauna for thousands of years. The world entered a period of dramatic change known as the Quaternary extinction. Across North and South America, many of the largest animals began to disappear. The reasons are still debated today. Rapid climate change transformed habitats as the Ice Age came to an end, while expanding human populations placed increasing pressure on already struggling megafauna. Whatever combination of factors drove these extinctions, the result was the same. The giants that had sustained entire ecosystems were vanishing. For Smilodon, this was more than the loss of a few prey species. It was the collapse of the very niche it had spent millions of years perfecting. Unlike more adaptable predators that could shift towards smaller animals or broader diets, Smilodon had become highly specialized for tackling enormous herbivores. The traits that once made it an unrivaled hunter suddenly offered little advantage in a rapidly changing world with fewer giants to hunt. By roughly 10,000 years ago, both Smilodon fatalis and Smilodon populator had disappeared, bringing not only the end of the genus, but also the final chapter of the saber-toothed cats themselves. A lineage that had survived and diversified for more than 20 million years was gone. Smilodon's story is a reminder that evolution has no finish line. It rewards whatever works in the present, not whatever will work forever. The same adaptations that elevate a species to the top of the food chain can become liabilities when the environment changes. In the end, the greatest giant killer of the Ice Age wasn't defeated by a stronger predator. It was defeated by a world that no longer needed the predator it had become.